There are plenty of reasons to use Godot, but the reasons I keep coming back to it aren't the ones you usually hear about. It's the small things, the design decisions that make building a game feel better. So let's talk about 10 things Godot gets surprisingly right. One of the first things that really clicked with me in Godot is how much you can actually do with a scene. A scene isn't just a level or a collection of objects. It can be an enemy, a weapon, a UI element, a complete gameplay system. Basically, if something starts becoming its own thing, it can become a scene. And then that scene can be used inside other scenes. This sounds simple, but it changes the way you think about building a game. Instead of having one massive project where everything is connected to everything else, you naturally start creating these small pieces that can exist on their own. And those pieces can be combined into something much bigger. That's what I really like about it. Godot doesn't make you think about your game as one giant project. It lets you think about it as a collection of smaller things that you can build, change, or reuse whenever you want. This might be one of my favorite things about Godot. It doesn't constantly try to tell you how your game is supposed to be structured. A lot of engines have a very specific way of doing things, and sometimes that's great. But the problem is when your project doesn't really fit that structure. Godot is much more comfortable letting you figure that out yourself. You can build something with a simple script and a few nodes, or you can create a much more complicated architecture when the project actually needs it. You can keep things object-oriented, you can build systems around composition. You can use autoloaders for global systems, or you can create your own managers, resources, tools, or completely other different patterns. Godot gives you the pieces, but it doesn't constantly stand over your shoulder telling you which pieces you're allowed to use. And I think that's important because there is no single architecture that works perfectly for every game. Ever opened a project after 6 months and wondered, where is this value even coming from? Godot avoids that surprisingly well. Since you create multiple scenes or resources, they are easily readable. Most of the time, if something exists, you can actually find it. That sounds obvious, of course, until you spent an afternoon hunting through hidden serialization data in other engines. And that's because Godot encourages you to separate things naturally. A lot of engines talk about keeping things separated. Separate your systems, separate your responsibilities, keep your code modular, all good advice. But sometimes actually doing this can become complicated. Godot makes it feel much more natural, because a lot of things you build can simply become their own node. A hitbox can be a node, health can be a node, an interaction system can be a node as well. All because these things exist independently. You can move them around, reuse them, or attach them to completely different parts of your game. Your player doesn't have to own every single piece of gameplay logic. You can have a health component handling health, a hitbox handling collisions, an interaction component handling interactions, and suddenly, instead of one giant script responsible for everything, you have a bunch of small pieces that each have a clear purpose. The interesting part is that Godot doesn't really force you to sit down and design some complicated architecture to achieve this. You just start building with nodes, and that separation happens naturally. The bigger your project gets, the more you start appreciating that. Signals are one of those things in Godot that I didn't really appreciate at first. They seemed pretty simple, but after using them for a while, I started realizing how much cleaner they make a project feel. A lot of the time, different parts of a game need communication with each other. The problem is that they can get messy really quick. One script starts depending on another, then another system depends on that script. And before you know it, changing one thing somehow breaks 3 other things. Signals give you a really nice way around that. Something can basically announce that an event happened without needing to know who's going to react to it. And that sounds like a small distinction, but it makes your system feel a lot less tangled. I especially like how readable it is. You can look at a node and see the signals it sends, what they are connected to, and where that communication is happening. There is something really satisfying about that. It's one of those Godot features that doesn't look particularly impressive on paper, but once you've worked with it for a while, you start wondering how you ever lived without it. Something I really like about resources in Godot is that they don't feel like this big, complicated feature you have to build your entire project around. They just exist. You can make a resource, give it some properties, save it, and suddenly that data becomes something you can work with anywhere in your project. And the really nice part is that resources can become whatever makes sense for your game. A weapon definition, an enemy type, an item, whatever you want. You're not locked into some giant database system or a specific way of organizing all of this information. It's just a simple object that contains data. And because it's so simple, you end up using it everywhere without really thinking about it. That's probably what I like most about resources. They're not trying to be impressive, they are just incredibly convenient. And once you've built a project around them, going back to keeping all the information inside random scripts feel unnecessarily messy. The remote scene tree is one of those features I didn't think much about when I first started using Godot. Then you work on a project that has something going wrong and suddenly you realize how useful it is. Because when the game is running, you can actually see what's happening inside your game, not some simplified version of it, an actual scene tree. You can see the nodes that exist, their current values, what's being added or removed, and how things are changing while the game is running. And that makes debugging feel a lot less like guessing. You don't have to stop the game every time you want to understand what's happening. You can just watch it, see where the enemy actually is, see what a variable is doing, and look at a node that shouldn't be there. It sounds pretty simple, but when something is going wrong and you have absolutely no idea why, being able to look directly at the game and inspect it is incredibly useful. It's probably one of those features that you don't appreciate until you don't have it. The speed of the editor is something I really appreciate in Godot. You can be working on something, press play, test it for a few seconds, stop, make a change, and press play again almost immediately. There is barely any interruption to the workflow. And because you do this constantly while making a game, that speed adds up. You're not sitting around waiting for a project to load every time you want to test a small change. You just press play and you're back in the game. Even stopping and starting feel almost instant. It's a small thing, but when you're doing it hundreds of times throughout a project, you really start to notice it. The editor just gets out of the way. And honestly, that's exactly what I want from an engine. For a long time, I think Godot's reputation in 3D was basically, yeah, you can make a 3D game in it. And honestly, I don't think that's fair anymore. Godot's 3D tools have come a long way. The render is much more better, the lighting is good, the environment system is very good, and there is a lot more you can actually do with 3D now without feeling like you're fighting the engine. And as someone who mainly makes 3D games in Godot, I think that's really easy to appreciate. Obviously, Unreal has a much more bigger 3D ecosystem. Unity has been doing 3D for a very long time and has a huge amount of toolings and assets around it. Godot isn't trying to beat those engines at everything, but honestly, I don't think it needs to. What I like is that Godot 3D workflow still feels like Godot. The scene system, the nodes, the resources, the way everything fits together. It all carries over really naturally when you're working in 3D. I'm not constantly switching between completely different systems just because I'm making a 3D game. And that's probably the biggest thing for me. I don't use Godot for 3D because it's good enough. I use it because I genuinely enjoy making 3D games in it. This one is probably the least technical point on this list, but it's honestly the biggest reason why I keep using Godot. I actually enjoy opening it. And that might sound stupid, but I think it matters. When I have an idea for a game, I don't feel like I need to prepare myself before I start working on it. I just open Godot and I start building. Sometimes I spend hours working on something without even realizing how much time has passed. I'll change something, break something, fix it, try another idea, and just keep going. And that's not really because Godot has some feature that other engines doesn't have. It's just the way everything comes together. The editor feels familiar, the workflow makes sense to me, and I know where everything is. And I also know how to structure my projects. After using it for a long time, it just feels comfortable. And I think that's something you can't really measure in an engine comparison. You can compare renders, features, performance, tooling, but you can't really compare how much you enjoy using the engine. For me, that's probably the biggest reason Godot has stuck with me. Godot definitely isn't perfect. There are areas where Unreal is stronger, areas where Unity has better tooling. But the reason so many developers stick with Godot isn't because it's the biggest engine. It's because using it feels comfortable. It removes friction instead of adding it, and after a while, that's worth way more than another list of features. So if you're a Godot developer, what's the one thing you miss whenever you switch to another engine? I'm curious to hear your answer.